Good morning and welcome to our webcast. My name is Surisha Ganta. I'm an attorney with the Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta, and today our speakers will be talking to us about serving undocumented populations, basics for nonprofits. We're excited to have Keila Marti from the Solana Law Firm and Caroline McGee from King & Spalding with us this morning. Before I turn the microphone over to them, I would like to give you some information about the Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. Our mission is to maximize the impact of pro bono engagement by connecting a network of attorneys with nonprofits in need of free business legal services. Our clients are 501c3 organizations in the Metro Atlanta area that serve low-income or disadvantaged individuals and can otherwise not afford legal services. If you're interested in becoming a client of ours, please visit our website. Also at our website, you will find previous webcasts and articles and dates for future workshops and webcasts. Please keep in mind that today's information is just general guidance. If you need specific legal advice, please reach out to your attorney. And today's webcast is copyright Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. And I'll thank you, Caroline and Keila, for speaking to us today and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much
Thank you for having us.
giving us the opportunity. Well, to frame our conversation, my name is Caroline McGee, and I work as a finance specialist attorney at King & Spalding, a big chunk of my time, and then the other part of my time I spend as clergy. I'm an Episcopal priest at St. Bede's Episcopal Church, which is in the Tucker area here in Atlanta. And we have a worship service in Spanish, and we've become really involved with our Spanish-speaking community all around where we're located, which is Beaufort Highway, Chamblee, all this. And so through all of that, we started to learn a lot about immigration in general, and then we do lots of work through English as a second language and other kinds of activities with people who have immigrated either recently or a long time ago to the United States. And then we started to develop questions of, well, we are a nonprofit and we don't really know, are there any things we should know about serving people who have immigrated? And we don't necessarily know anybody's documentation status, but it occurred to us, are we supposed to know? What are the requirements for us? And then as those questions came up to us, we learned throughout the faith community the same questions were coming up, and we did not have good answers. So we wanted an opportunity to do the research and share those answers with the wider community. So we're going to have a conversation today and raise some of the questions that different nonprofits have brought up and get some accurate answers. And hopefully you'll take away the message that nonprofit service to the community can be to everybody, and this is not a cause for anxiety or a requirement for new specialized knowledge. It's just tools so that you can feel comfortable in your service to the communities you're already serving, knowing how to interact with immigration as you hear about it.
Well, I'm Keila Marti. I'm an immigration attorney here in Atlanta, and I'm very, very excited to be here. I love immigration law. I've been around it, I guess, for, like 14 years since I came here as an immigrant myself, first as a student, then a permanent resident, and last year as a citizen. So immigration law is what I call a puzzle that I care to solve. And it's fascinating, and it involves people and people's stories, and I think we can all appreciate that we all have a story. And so it's a great privilege for me to be here. I'm excited to share some knowledge with you all and to just provide some good information that will help you make better decisions regarding your organizations.
So one of the first questions that always comes up is, what does immigration and status even mean? So Keila has a few highlights for us for basic understanding.
Well, immigration category is, first of all, immigration law is incredibly complex. I think people don't appreciate really how complex it is. Some people have said that it's just as complex as tax law, if not more. And if you think about it, I don't think the average American understands basic, like very complex ideas of tax law. Same thing with immigration law. So I want you to shed your ideas of what you think you know about immigration, and just open up and kind of listen to the brief explanation that I have. I designed this triangle as I was working for a nonprofit, and I was teaching refugees basic immigration law so that they could understand and better protect themselves and make sure that they weren't running afoul any serious rules. And so this triangle I designed myself. And it's extremely basic. So I've pretty much peeled the layers and just put it in its most basic form. I know all my immigration colleagues, if they look at this triangle, will be like, Keila, what is this? But it basically puts it in the most basic form. In America, if you want to put it as the most basic, purest form, is made up of either citizens, U.S. citizens, or non-citizens. And the non-citizen category is a mix of a bunch of things, and the citizen category also has a mix of a bunch of things. So first off, the triangle expresses the different categories, and what I like about a triangle figure is that as you go up, think of your rights going up, increasing. So if you look at the bottom, we have undocumented immigrants. As you go up, the amount of rights that you have go up. So U.S. citizens have the highest level of rights in the nation. I also put the arrows to reflect that it is possible in America to travel from being an undocumented immigrant all the way to becoming a U.S. citizen. And in certain cases, it is possible for you to be a U.S. citizen and go all the way back down to being undocumented. So I know that kind of blows people's minds a little bit, but it is a possibility. And so if we can start with U.S. citizens. And so U.S. citizens, if you are a U.S. citizen by birth, you are either a citizen through blood or through soil. And through blood meaning that one of your parents is a U.S. citizen. There are very complex rules, and they involve when your parent was born, when you were born, how much time your father or mother has been, whether your parents were married, if you weren't born in the United States, whether you will be able to get that citizenship from that parent. And then by land, meaning that if you're born in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen. And a lot of countries don't have that. And refugees, for example, who live in Lebanon, they can be from a different country, but the fact that they're born in Lebanon doesn't mean that they're Lebanese citizens. So America is unique in that concept. Now, there's also citizenship by operation of law. So, for example, if my parents are permanent residents and I'm a permanent resident, but both my parents become citizens before I turn 18, I automatically become a U.S. citizen. And similarly, there are people who fulfill certain requirements who become U.S. citizens. So myself, I do not have a U.S. citizen parent. I came to the United States as an immigrant, a legal immigrant throughout my whole history in the United States, and then I was able to become a U.S. citizen. So that's U.S. citizenship in a nutshell. And when I say that you can lose U.S. citizenship, it has to be something serious. And please note that if you obtain your citizenship through blood or soil, that's yours. But if you naturalize like I did and like thousands of other people have, if there was fraud at the inception, meaning that you should have never had citizenship to begin with, you failed to disclose information, or you committed a crime that is severe enough for you to lose your citizenship, then that will occur. And it typically involves something like treason or some sort of crime in the process of you becoming a citizen. And so that's where we start at the top with citizenship. Below that, we have LPRs, or legal permanent residents, and these are people with a famous green card. So the people who have established that they're eligible for this benefit and that they are able to, that they desire to be here, and they have a category to get the residency. Now, Below that, we have authorized non-immigrants, and sometimes I put refugees in it. I create a different category within the triangle, because refugees and asylees are kind of like their own animal. Like they come in and they're immigrants. They don't have a residency, but they will be able to get one within the year, provided they fulfill some requirements. So there's some interaction there. And then at the very bottom, we have undocumented immigrants, which are people who either came in without any legal status, you know, the very classical idea of people crossing the border or the Rio Grande. But as Surisha noted earlier, when we were just having a little discussion, the majority of people who are here undocumented had some sort of status at some point, so entered legally. And so, like I said, there is an arrow going up to explain that there are certain rules and laws that permit people who entered undocumented who don't have status to climb all the way up to become a U.S. citizen. In the same way, you can climb all the way down in the way that I explained. Now, the path is not as easy as the arrow makes it seem. If you don't have any equities or anything in your life that allow you to fall within the category of people who are eligible to get status in the United States, to become a permanent resident. And please note, you can never be a citizen if you're not a permanent resident first. Like, that's just one of those things. Either you inherited it by birth and just didn't realize it, or you got it from one of your parents, or you were born in the United States. But if you got it by operation of law, kind of like I did, you have to be a permanent resident first. It's a requirement. So it's complex. And also another thing is that legal status is just that. It's a legal determination. So believe it or not, I have clients who don't know what their status is because it's very complex, and I've explained it to them and it's in a paper. But it's hard to conceptualize sometimes, and that's why I want people to understand that it's a whole array of things that merge together to give people their statuses. So it's increasingly complex.
So questions that have come to me are, if I'm a nonprofit and we just offer English as a second language, or tutoring for neighborhood children, or sandwiches, we give out food. Do I need to understand where all the people that come into my organization fall on the pyramid?
My answer would be no, not really. I mean,
Thank you.
unless you have some sort of grant or contract that requires you to serve a certain population, and then you have to ask people's statuses to know whether you can use that money to help people. I would say, like I said, it's a legal determination that immigration attorneys are trained to do, immigration judges, the Department of Homeland Security personnel. They are the ones who make those determinations. And so I would advise people to not get involved in those matters because, again, it's not just a factual determination, it's a legal one. So to purport or to say, oh, I know enough to know what this person's status is, it's a little too much.
And we don't need to.
And you don't need to, right? Exactly.
So another question that came up in discussions is, well, what is harboring? We hear this word harboring in the news, and we host people in our building, or we offer gatherings or opportunities where we are involved with a whole mix of people, and we don't know everyone's status. Could we get in trouble for harboring?
So harboring is a concept that is in the statute, and I think we have it in the citation in our PowerPoint. It's in the Immigration Nationality Act, and also it's a statute, and it says it's a criminal offense to knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to entered or remains in the U.S. in violation of law, you conceal or harbor, there's that word, harboring, or shield from detection or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection such alien in any place, including any building, any means of transportation. So if you look at it, it doesn't define harboring. So circuits around the nation have kind of come up with their own definitions. And so one of my favorite ones is the one from the 7th Circuit, which is the one that I shared. It says, let me just make sure I am reading the right one. Okay, yes, that's the one. So, that's the, no. Okay, now I'm just going to read it out loud. It says, harboring is conduct that provides or offers a known undocumented individual a secure haven, a refuge, a place to stay in which authorities are unlikely to be seeking him. So it's, actually it's the 6th Circuit. I'm sorry, I was reading the 7th Circuit. So my favorite definition, the one that I feel like gives people the best understanding of what harboring actually is the one from the 6th Circuit. Harboring is conduct that clandestinely shelters, succors, and protects improperly admitted immigrants. So when you say harboring, it has to be more than just I gave you a sandwich. It has to be, and I also, the lawyers out there, and you're a lawyer yourself too, knowing or reckless disregard. Those are not just words, it's a term of art. When we say knowing, and leave it to lawyers to make a very easy thing complex, but when do you actually know something? If I am saying that immigration law is a legal determination that sometimes the clients themselves don't know, and that you need a lawyer and a judge to clarify it, when do you really know?
So it's okay for you to hear people's stories or overhear folks talking about whatever's going on in their lives. None of the work that's happening in routine nonprofit life is going to get crossways with this concept of harboring, which is very, very specific. So we're hopeful that this will reduce your anxiety about that concept.
Right. And just going back to the idea of knowing, to give you an example, there's people who are U.S. citizens who don't even know it themselves. So how is it possible for you to know? So it's just one of those things, like, keep in mind, before you get caught up in the word harbor, think about, do I know? Because that's one of the elements. You must know, or have reckless disregard. So yeah.
Well, we have a couple other terms that might be helpful to talk about. Others that I hear tossed around are this concept of sanctuary, particularly in the faith community, the notion of a sanctuary. But could you speak a little about what sanctuary is, or really what it is not, and also what the concept of sensitive locations is?
Sure. So sanctuary, when I say sanctuary, the word that comes to mind is one of those churches that have allowed, like, the undocumented mom to be there protected so that ICE doesn't dare come close. And really naming something a sanctuary, like, number one, there's no process that you can apply to become a sanctuary. It's basically a word that you are giving to yourself. And it has no legal meaning. So there is nothing that shields an ICE officer from coming in just because you call yourself a sanctuary. So don't be fooled into thinking that just because it's a church, just because there's a crucifix on the front, is going to provide some protection for people.
And we don't like to share, we don't want to give the impression that there are places that actually are a sanctuary, just as we share information about where people can get support from different nonprofits or other community organizations. We don't like to be misleading. So sanctuary, really, it's something we can discuss, but it doesn't have legal meaning or force. But sensitive locations is something a little bit different for ICE purposes.
So a sensitive location is something, that term is in the Violence Against Women Act. I think it was enacted first in 2005. And it gives people it doesn't protect 100%. It just means that if an ICE officer is going to go to, say, a domestic violence shelter or a place that provides psychological assistance or some sort of assistance for people, men and women who have been victims of domestic abuse, they have to take certain precautions to make sure that they are protecting the people's identity, that they're not running afoul of the Violence Against Women Act. It doesn't completely shield people, meaning that, you totally can't come through that door. They just have to take certain additional steps. And by and large, they tend to be respectful. We've seen some crazy things these days, but that's still one of the places where there's still some sort of respite.
And aren't schools and nonprofits serving children, churches, hospitals? Are there some other categories of sensitive locations?
Well, the ones that I read had to dealt with specific with violence victims.
Okay. Can a nonprofit lose status for offering their services and happening to their 501c3 status for potentially having offered some of their services to people who are not documented?
So 501c3, that's a tax status, essentially. So it has to do with whether you are doing stuff that's outside of your designated status. And typically it does not involve serving undocumented people, right? And so the short answer is no, but I would put an asterisk and say, be careful, number one, that you're not running afoul your grants, right? Because if you're getting federal money and they're telling you this money is for XYZ and you're using it for something else, then you would lose your status, not because the people that you're serving are undocumented, but because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, which is illegal. And then the other asterisk that I would add would be one of the ways of losing your status is committing a federal crime, such as harboring. So if you are charged with and found guilty of harboring, then you could lose your status, not because it was an undocumented person, but because it's illegal. Just like it would be illegal for you to be selling cocaine out of your office.
And yes, again, just a very difficult thing to be charged with. Yes. It is something you are not doing if you are offering tutoring services or something similar.
And just to give an idea of how crazy the actions have to be, I gave an example from the Second Circuit of a gentleman who was harboring in the sense of the word that the Second Circuit basically said they were harboring. So this gentleman had several houses. He would provide the addresses for the homes to people that he knew were coming undocumented. They would go to the house. He would provide a help completing work application, transporting them to and from work, arrange illegal marriages to U.S. citizens. And when ICE came with a warrant, they found 27 people in his homes. That's when he was charged with harboring. And then in finding that he did commit this crime, the Second Circuit just kind of laid it out and said, look, you were giving people homes, you were actively helping them conceal the fact that you're here undocumented. We were providing jobs, providing false information in job applications, providing false information to the government and saying that these marriages were valid. So just to give you an idea, that's how severe and how extreme your actions have to be in order to be found guilty. And even then, if you're a nonprofit, which judge and which ICE officer wants to be guilty of putting a priest or a pastor or somebody who's helping, say, a mother, undocumented mother with children to find food? Nobody wants to put that person behind bars. So at the end of the day, even if you're doing something like that, I think it just looks so bad in the public eye that the government would imprison someone for helping a human being, that even if you did, it would just be, you probably get a probation or something like that.
So hopefully our takeaway is that helping is not the same as harboring. So we have this information. What does this mean? How can a nonprofit be just prepared generally to have their staff and general community understand immigration basics so that they aren't anxious about providing their services broadly?
Yes, absolutely. So my first piece of advice is meet together. The people who run the nonprofit meet together and talk to each other and say, how do we want to be known? What do we want to provide? What services do we want to provide? What is going to be our stance? And that is very important, right? Like, if you're an organization that says, you know what, let's say you're a faith-based community, and there are faith-based communities who have done this, who have said, you know what, I believe God's law is superior to the law of man, and I do believe that I'm being called to do X, Y, Z. Case in point, and I don't believe they are faith-based, but it's an organization, I forget their name, but they were leaving bottles of water in the desert for people.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Because they said, look, whether they're undocumented or not, nobody deserves to die alone in the desert without any water. And so one of the organizers was arrested, and I think they were trying to charge them with harboring, and they're saying, you know what, we don't care. We just want to help people. So that could be your organization. I don't know. But that's a conversation that you guys need to have and make that decision and set the parameters to begin with. The second thing would be to designate someone who's going to be the person to review whatever document ICE brings if they come knocking to your door. So nonprofits have Fourth Amendment rights, meaning that you cannot be deprived, or the authorities cannot come in without a warrant.
And just to frame this a little bit, the likelihood of anybody coming to your organization to ask these sorts of questions is extremely low. But I found in conversation that the anxiety about, well, what if someone were to show up? What would we say? It can be really helpful just to have confidence in that what your rights are as an organization, and that you don't have to just give any official of any sort free wanderings throughout your space. It's good knowledge really for you to have anyway.
Right. So as far as your public spaces go, so like your area of worship, if it's considered a public space, the officer can go in. The front office, the temple, whatever you want to call it, and even in some religions, the temple might not be public. But then the officer can come in and out just like any other person could. But when it comes to accessing your private areas, you're looking at your documents, talking to your people. You have a Fourth Amendment right to say, and you don't have to be mean about it. You can just be like, officer, we have a policy here. This is our policy, and in order for you to have access to that information, we are required that you bring us a warrant. Now, one thing that I do want to make very clear, ICE doesn't always have judicial warrants, and there's a difference between an ICE detainer and a warrant, or an ICE warrant, if you want to call it. And so ICE has this database. So, and I'm talking about specifically like a warrant to arrest someone. In law school, they teach you that a warrant is when an officer goes to a judge, gives them the basic information, the judge signs off on the warrant. That's not what an ICE detainer is. So please, when you hear that the ICE gave the sheriff a detainer, do not think that this was issued upon probable cause. It wasn't. It means that this officer typed up a name on their database, and if it didn't pull up, they will write it out and sign the document. That is not a judge, and there have been U.S. citizens who don't pop up in the system who get ICE detainers, who shouldn't be getting them. So an ICE detainer or an ICE warrant is not the same thing as a judicial warrant. So make sure that whoever, and like I said, that's why I'm saying designate one person who will know how to identify an ICE warrant from a regular warrant and differentiate, because not everybody in the organization is going to know.
So a recommendation is if you know that you do services with all sorts of populations of people, and just have one person that learns, they can either contact any of a number of legal organizations in your specific community, or we're going to hopefully share some links when this is posted later where you can look up information. As long as one person of your organization has some sense of what a judicial warrant is with the court name stamped on it and that sort of thing, then if someone were to come and ask, you can just say really politely, oh, our policy is you're welcome to be in this public area, but our policy is beyond that. We need a warrant, and the person is either in the next office or won't be until Tuesday. Can you come back at that time? And we're happy to work with you then. But then at least you have one person on your location that feels comfortable with these different kinds of information. And again, it's not bad knowledge for people to have generally just doing operations in the United States.
And also, if it were to happen, which is unlikely, that an officer pushes their way through, do not fight it. Don't engage physically or verbally with the officer. I would say, respectfully, if you want to pull out your phone and start recording, you can do that. That is your right. You can ask the officer's name. You can ask for their badge number. You can record and either in paper or through your camera exactly what is happening. We're not encouraging people to become belligerent or to get combative. At the end of the day, if the officer pushes through without a warrant, it's on them, not on you. So, let's not make it something that it isn't. If they want to go ahead and start violating people's rights, that's a different story, and that'll be hashed out in another setting. But do not engage in any kind of a physical or verbal altercation.
And again, likelihood of this all extremely low. It's just for knowledge, because when we begin to imagine things, we get anxious. And the hope here is that nobody will feel like they should need to deny service to people when you offer your services broadly, because you become anxious about, are you doing something wrong? Could I get into a really ugly altercation with law enforcement? You most likely won't, and having this information hopefully will help you to feel confident in that.
In addition to, part of the conversation that you have with the people in your organization is to committing to a policy of non-discrimination. And have it written, have it in bold, have it printed next to the reception, and point to it and say, hey, sorry, we don't ask, our job is non-discriminatory. And also realize that discrimination based on nationality is not allowed under the Constitution unless the legislation has allowed it to. So obviously the Immigration and Nationality Act is a giant book of do's and don'ts for immigrants, but beyond that, people shouldn't be discriminated based on national origin. So commit to that, make it public, make it known, make sure your staff knows. Look, we don't ask people's statuses. It is what it is. Unless there's a federal grant or you're getting money that requires you to ask, there's really no reason for anybody to be asking. It's like, why would you ask somebody's sexual orientation? Really, it shouldn't matter.
To services
not relevant.
that you're providing.
Exactly.
I was in some of my notes, I think when I asked you earlier, we were talking about federal law and sensitive locations. There are Immigrations and Customs, and I think it's Customs and Border Protection.
Yes.
They do have some policies where they've just internally, this is not by operation of law, but they've identified for themselves sensitive locations. That all that means is that ICE goes through a slightly higher level of review before they enter those locations. And so some of those include, but it is not limited to, schools, hospitals, places of worship, organizations assisting children, pregnant women, the victims of domestic abuse, individuals with significant mental or physical disabilities. It's a wide range. And this is just to give you a sense that if your organization is serving any of these populations, it is already very unlikely you'll have a visit from anybody from ICE. But if someone were to come by, if you do serve a lot of populations that have immigrated, and maybe you are more used to seeing ICE presence, they would take extra steps before coming on board. And if they were to come in, you can politely remind them, like, oh, we fall within that sensitive locations category, so together with a warrant, or we just need a little more information. And they will know what you're talking about, and it's fine. It's just reminding everybody what kind of work your organization does. I think that covers a lot of the questions that I had. I'm wondering if anybody watching has questions that have come up.
I have a question here. If my organization provides rental assistance through private dollars, are we obligated to ask about status?
There is, by and large, no obligation to ask about status unless you are required to by your grant. So in the policy of non-discrimination, that's part of it, not asking people's status unless you're absolutely required to.
Okay. And if my organization works with parents who work with children whose parents might be undocumented, and I notice signs of child abuse, I'm concerned about reporting that because, well, I want to protect the child, but I don't want the parents to be deported either, or there's questions about the family in general being deported.
Well, I would say that most states have some sort of mandatory reporter law.
And could you repeat the question I just asked?
Because people can't hear the question.
Okay. So the question that was asked was, if you work with children and potentially the parents of the children are undocumented, and you see signs of child abuse, and then you want to report it but are afraid that the parent would be deported. Now, I was saying that most states have some sort of mandatory reporting requirement. If you're working with children, at least in Georgia, you are a mandatory reporter. So, and it depends on the state how law enforcement is going to interact with that person. Note that a lot of child protection services, whatever it's called in your state, are civil in nature unless there is a criminal ongoing investigation. So just because a parent is in defects, and that's Georgia, investigation doesn't mean that they're going to alert ICE. Now, if it's something where it started criminally, let's say a parent was driving drunk or driving high, and then they got arrested, the child was in the car, and then defects were called, that's a different animal. So if you call defects and they open an investigation, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to ICE involvement, depending on the state, depending even on the city, because Atlanta, for example, does not turn people over to ICE, but other cities do. So that is a kind of case by case. I would say if a child's life is in danger, honestly, the parent's status shouldn't be that big of a concern if the child's life is in danger.
Okay. And you talked about the difference between an ICE detainer and ICE warrant. If an officer comes with just a detainer, does my organization have any obligation to share any information?
Nope.
Okay. Can you repeat the question?
Okay. So the question is explaining the difference between an ICE detainer and an actual warrant, and if ICE comes with a detainer, whether you have a duty to turn the person over. An ICE detainer is not a warrant, and you have Fourth Amendment rights, and the Fourth Amendment is met by a warrant.
I use the very technical process of internet searching what an ICE detainer looks like versus a judicial warrant, just to see some images, so that in preparing our policy for our organization, we can show people what the difference is. They don't look particularly similar, but you can do that too, just to take a look and get some different images to have in your head what's different and what's similar.
Right, and it's one thing, even police departments don't have to follow ICE detainers. Like Chicago has said, if ICE sends us a detainer, that's not binding on us whatsoever. So they ignore it by policy.
Okay. And if an officer comes with an ICE warrant, is that just to search, or if they ask any questions, if they ask the front desk questions, are they obligated to answer those questions?
So again, the Fourth Amendment, Fourth and Fifth Amendment, like you can't. Well, Fifth Amendment's again self-incrimination, but you don't have to provide any additional information. My basic spiel is, you can answer it. You don't even have to, but I would say, to keep it friendly, you could say, my name is so-and-so, and this is my role in the organization. If you want anything more, you're going to have to come back with some sort of warrant, because there's warrants for people, so like the warrant of arrest, and then there's a warrant for search. So if it's a warrant for arrest for Bobby over here, and I am in Stacy, that's a different order altogether. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're thinking through at our organization is probably the easiest way is, if any of this were to come up, that we have a senior person be designated as the one who, our policy is, I don't know how to review this stuff, but our executive director or our appointed representative is the person who will come in. So then our front desk person, it's not her responsibility to sort through all this and make decisions about the different programs that are being held in our building and where people can go. We get a senior person in to respond to questions of any officials if they were to ever come up.
Right. And now, if they do come with a warrant of arrest of a certain person, if you do oppose them, then you are violating the law. So just be careful, like if they're coming to arrest so-and-so and they're there, and you can't lie to an officer. You can't. That's another thing with harboring. If they come here with a warrant and I say Bobby is not here when he is, then you could get in trouble for that. So again, once a warrant is present, you have to make sure that you comply with the officer's request.
So I'm thinking through, like a judicial warrant for an arrest of an individual in my building, then that person then that's a totally different operator than just a blanket ICE. I'd just like to take a look around at the different classes you're offering or whoever's here. So one feels very specific to an individual person, and it's judicially issued, and one
there's already probable cause. There's something there that has caused the judge to sign that document.
Versus a much broader, more, not casual is not the right word, but not that hyper-specific situation.
A few more questions. If my organization has a client that is suffering from domestic violence, and they are an undocumented immigrant, and their partner is a U.S. citizen, she is afraid of reporting him, what advice would you have in terms of what to tell her?
So the question was whether an undocumented person is in an abusive relationship to a U.S. citizen and is afraid of reporting him. I would say, please don't be afraid. That's why the law is there. There's something called the U visa, which is specific to victims of domestic violence who are undocumented. And if you are legally married and your spouse is a U.S. citizen, then the Violence Against Women Act will allow you to self-petition so that you can petition yourself to become a legal permanent resident. That petition covers over a multitude of transgressions, immigration, or if you've worked illegally, or if you've been deported in the past, you get protected. So please don't let your status, and don't believe, we see that all the time in our practice where the abuser will say, I will call ICE, or they will deport you if you report me, or they have your passport. Don't believe that. That's actually part of the abuse cycle. So I would recommend that you contact an organization that specializes in working with victims of domestic abuse and get that support that you need. Do not be afraid.
And one final question. Our organization provides scholarship monies to students. Are there any implications if some of those students are undocumented?
And where does the money come from? That would be a
Okay.
question. So,
Yeah.
so the question is, we're an organization that provides a financial aid to students who are studying. And some of them might be undocumented. Like if you could get in trouble for that. It depends. It's a kind of a factual determination. I know people who get scholarship money and they have DACA, which is not a status per se, it's a protection. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just, it's a very specific question, so I would say contact your local attorney.
All right, that's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you.